Yes, good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to thank the invitation from the EBC and I want to say hi to the panelists and also to the audience. Can see most of you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a technical director or scientific program director with West Valley Mosquito Vector Control District forever. So here, I'm so glad today share with uh, Biorational Larvicide for mosquito control and with some notes on resistance management. So let's start from BT and BTI. Uh, so if you are in the research and application field of biorational microbial and IGR, you probably feel my talk today going to be awfully boring. But if you're new, it may be something new for you. We'll see. A lot of data compact into this talk. I will have to finish up within 25 minutes. Some of the area may go a little fast. So the BT story, don't have to repeat it, back to almost 100 years ago. Start from Japan, then Germany, then currently there are 14 serotypes and 16 subspecies. They're showing some activity against mosquitoes. So here's the active strains against mosquitoes from BTI, Mersoni and others all the way to Hygo down to the end. Actually, I highlight the BTI in the green one because this one is the only one so far has been commercialized. So when we talk about BTI, we have to mention Dr. Margaret from Israel. So the story starts from 1976 when this bacteria was discovered in Negev Desert in Israel. So I remember the read article in JAMCA, the first issue when Mosquito News changed the name to JAMCA. I think that was a nice review about this whole story. So the toxins, there are 4 toxins. They synergize each other. The critical toxin among these 4 is Cyto1A is the first one, and is a gut toxin, and belong to, if you are familiar with IRAC, Insect Resistance Acting Committee, belong to group 11. I targeted Diptera species, mosquitoes, black flies, and midges, and a couple others. Safe to non-target, that'd be the safest ever larvicide we could have in mosquito field. I keep saying discovery of BTI and application is really a blessing for us. Resistance concern, if you talk about entire BTI, there are no issues. If you talk about individual toxin, yes. So I want to emphasize the scanning microscope picture down to the bottom that was published in Wing Beats. I just can't find out the volume and year. Somebody out here today from Florida, you probably see this earlier. I want to credit this a remarkable job. Have this like a 3D looking scanning. So the product, from slow release liquid like a back-to-back 12AS, Techner, Aquabac, then 4-star back-to-back CGG, then back-to-back WGG, and all the way down to the end of BTI briquette. So a lot of product has been developed. Maybe time span wise, maybe the longest development history from the very first one to the current tailor-made formulations for different mosquitoes. I'm not go through this table here and with formulation, their potency and application rate and application method, and also their estimated residual activity or efficacy. But just give you a quick view of the product we have. So like I said, if you talk about the whole BTI, has been tried many times in Culex pipiens complex and the Egypti. You run many generations, intensive selection. You try hard to get resistance, just you can't get it. Well, that's the beauty of BTI. But if you talk about the individual toxin, like particularly crystal toxins, you will get different level of resistance. But more toxins in the combination, less chance you get resistance. If you have site 1A there, you're not going to get resistance. So Strix, the next one, also under very active development, actually discovered back to 1960s. It's kind of earlier than BTI. There are many species, and many serotypes actually is a high diversity in these species. There are 16 strains that are active against mosquitoes. 2362, 1593, 2297, C341, are the active ones or against has been studied the most and as maybe applied most. But in the United States, 2362, the first one, is the most used, if not all. Actually, this strain is even not discovered in mosquitoes, in Siberian black flies. So there are binary toxins. There are only 2 toxins inside. The gut toxin belong to the same group, RAC11, and targeted kind of narrower than BTI. Some mosquitoes, not all mosquitoes, is safe to other in-target, non-target organisms. And there are some issues with resistance. We'll talk about that. So product, there are relatively fewer products available based on Spherex because of concern of resistance if you use alone. Of course, Vectolex, and that's Spherex, only 2 brand names under this active ingredient. So let's talk about a little bit on resistance development. Since 1995, the first report in southern France, that was in the field. And then a lot of lab studies initiated, selecting different generations, as low as 7 generations to 8 generations, use different strains, and then get all levels of resistance. Some levels can be very, very high. So in the field, like I said, in the first report in France in 1995, then Brazil, India, France, China, Indonesia, Thailand, and most recently the United States in 2017-19, actually in Chico, California, and Salt Lake City, Utah. There are 2 cases. But after this many years application decade, only 2 cases in the United States where they used the most. I think the risk is quite low. So cross resistance. Unfortunately, once the mosquitoes develop resistance to one strain of Spherex, they're also resistant to other strains, but not to BTI. There's different cases here. The green letters of BTI showing that lack of cross resistance. All other strains are different level of cross between or among. So prevent, you can using mixture of BTI and Spherex, or you can use recombinant. It has been studied with UC Riverside entomology. A lot of candidate recombinant, but this time they're not commercialized yet. And restoration after the resistance development, you still can use BTI to restore it, or use a mixture of BTI and Spherex to restore it, or use recombinant to restore it. But one thing I want to make sure that seems one of the most common use strategy for resistance management, which is rotation. When you rotate BTI and Spherex, seems you build up the resistance to Spherex even faster than use Spherex alone. I don't know how to explain. So that's the chart as you talk about the look at the dark blue line. When you rotate these 2, actually you got resistance even faster. You use Spherex alone, of course, you get certain level, gradually, and use a mixture, which is the green line. You pretty much can prevent that. You don't have to worry about it. So, after resistance, like I said, you can use mixture BTI Spherex to restore, or use BTI to bring them back, or use BTI. They still can back to Spherex, give you decent control. So the key information is that you don't want to use Spherex to hit the same population without monitoring again. All right, so these 2, BTI and Spherex, if you compare these 2, they have their strengths and weakness. It's nothing's panacea in terms of action, target, non-target, cycling, biodegradable, and organic tolerance, residual, and the risk of resistance. So it seems, one's weakness is another's strength, or vice versa. That's why the combinations come. We have to mention Vectomax, different formulations. Then follow that, the 4-star also have a combination. So take the full advantage of Spherex and BTI with their broad targeting BTI, tolerance to organic in Spherex, prevention resistance by BTI, and quick action by BTI. So forth and so forth. So on and so forth. You can put this together for better end control. So I'm going to switch the gear for spinosad. This is entire spinosad in agriculture is nothing new. Whole story starts from 1982. You all know the story, how this bacteria was discovered. This picture from, internet, I'm sure, the sources, I didn't put it here, but I really credit the author for these pictures. How this bacteria was discovered from basically a compost sugarcane pile in Virgin Island, I think. So the microbial Sakura polyspora spinosa is produced, 20 natural spinosyn. There are currently about 200 synthetic spinozoid or mimic of spinosyn. So it's belonged to IRIC group of 5. Is by US EPA. We know Strexin and BTI, there are true biopesticide, therefore AMRI listing. But spinosad is recognized as reduced risk pesticide by US EPA. So target agriculture is a broad spectrum pesticide. It's not selective. You can do a selective, by dosing, of course. So resistance concern, I will talk about in detail a little bit later. So the mode of action different from Strexin BTF, which are the gut toxin we talk about. Here is a neurotoxin. Basically, is a activation of postsynaptic nicotinic acetylcholine receptor and GABA receptor, cause the overexcitation of neural system, leading to target death. So remember, the key word is overexcitation. It has to be really over. If they're not overexcited, when they come back, they become somebody else. Let's talk about that. So that's how it works. Product currently under natural trade name, they have fast release 20.6% EC all the way to slow release XRT with different residual activity designed for different target and different habitat. So we ran some trials on dairy, water, lagoons. Those this type of habitat, so much organic and flavor during summertime. You don't need a GPS. Just follow your nose. You get there on time. You can drive there without missing the target. So G30 is a well-developed product. We tried that. We have a little bit, gap in the front. Sorry, in the front a little bit peak there because the granule take a couple of days to reach the optimal level, and after that, easily lasts for the whole month. So let's talk about resistance issue. Because the neurotoxin, like I said, cause overexcitation. You don't want to go sublethal, lower dose or something, intentionally or unintentionally. And then if you expose the lab colony for many generations here at a sublethal dose, as you can see, the resistance level going to go, exponential way. Pay attention to the y-axis is the log scale, so it's pretty high. So after this selection, you compare with the wild susceptible or the laboratory susceptible, you see the levels so obvious. So it's not end of the world if you if you withdraw the treatment that was simulated in the lab. So if you withdraw your treatment, they're going to come back. As you see the line, the level dropped. And if you simulate it in the field, you withdraw, and of course you have the untreated area. They have the infusion from the susceptible colony, or susceptible population, I'm sorry, in the field. And then you lose your resistance even faster. It drops to the ground. So the worst is not resistance risk or resistance development. The worst is you don't know what's going on there. If you know there's a risk, you can manage that. So here's the cross resistance. When mosquito develop resistance to spinosad, you're still safe for all the materials on the left from BTI, Sphyrix, methylprenid, pyrophosphine, pneumaloron, diflubenzuron, timifosine, imidacloprid, indoxacarb. You're okay. There's no cross resistance between. This is shown as green. So, however, in other case, so if when mosquito develop resistance to spinosad, boy, they also resistant to Sphyrix, spinotarum, ivermectin, and fipronil. I can see spinotarum because they have a similar mode of action. Oh, actually, it's pretty much the same mode of action, but spinotarum is 5 to 7 more 5 to 7 times more active than spinosad. But what's the reason of cross-resistance to Spherix? Ivermectin, fipronil, maybe, they are the synaptic area. Without knowing the mechanism, I cannot explain. This paper published in 2014, if you want to know the detail there. But in fact, it's fact, So unfortunately, the red. When mosquito resistant to Spherix already at a very high level, but they remain susceptible to spinosad. So that means the cross resistance between spinosad and Spherix is one way, from spinosad to Spherix, not the other way. And what about the methylprin? When mosquito develop resistance to methylprin, they still remain susceptible to spinosad and spironolactone even. So as you can see from here. So let's talk about BTI. Early minutes we talk about BTI. It was so good. Not only quick action and lack of resistance because of the intrinsic property of 4 toxins that are there. Look at here. When mosquitoes have a resistance, very, very high level resistance to spinosad, they are very susceptible to BTI. And if you add some BTI to it, it pretty much overcome the resistance to spinosad. That's so beautiful. So, and after the fact, if you mosquito are already resistant to spinosad at a very high level, and you switch to BTI for 15 generations, you pretty much lose it. That's pretty cool. I think it's indicate that BTI can be a powerful tool for resistance management to spinosad. So let's switch the gear to methylprin. Nothing new. Back to all the way to 1968 by Dr. Carl Gerasi with Stanford University Chemistry Department. And they synthesized the methylprin, quinoprene, and heteroprene, then the Zoicon and Wellmark and Central Life today. Mode of action is the juvenile hormone analog. Basically, it's the interrupt the juvenile hormone balance during the transition from late larvae to pupae to adults. When the internal juvenile hormone is low, they become very susceptible to methylprin. Then they will prevent their emergence, mostly. If you have high concentration, of course, you messed up all stages. How time going? 8:46. All right. So product, AutoSid is AutoSid Forever, brand name from 5% EC all the way to briquette and ingot. Different AI levels, different dose, different residual times, and also for different habitat. No need to repeat all that. I think if you guys from the operation, probably more than I do. Resistance, okay. Once we believe the discovery of methylprin actually can negate the potential resistance because it's such a unique mode of action. But in the Culex Pippin's group, from early days, 1970s, actually they're not proof for resistance. If you select that as sublethal for many, many generations, you're gonna get different level of resistance. And most recently, the last line here, 2020, we published, by myself. So we see some pretty decent level of resistance. Field, Tenorynchus nigromaculus. Nigromaculus actually 2 cases in California. One's in around 2000, another one's 2018. Early in Fresno, later in Turlock. You see the resistance level right there. Concrete fasciatus from Orange County, Tenorynchus in Florida. So, over almost 40 plus years application, this many, if I can talk about this one screen, I think it's not bad. So if you see, low level resistance from the field, you bring them to the lab, you give them pressure, you can bring up the resistance level to even higher, as you can see from here. And not only that, what about, do they also develop resistance to other things? And we bioassay the whole panel, from permethrin and BTI first, combination of spinosad, spironolactone, ivermectin, all the way to indoscarp. The black and green area, there's no issue. All the red dots and circles are showing noticeable cross-resistance level at 50 and 90 level. The weird thing is look at the above Spherix. I have no idea, what to do in between methylprin and Spherix. what I do know is when you got resistant to methylprednisolone, you watch out for spherix. You better run the bioassay seriously. So why spherix tangled with spinosad and methylprednisolone here? The new discovery is spherix not only to produce two binary toxins, also produce MTX, mosquito cytotoxins, which is doing a soluble form, not crystal form, during the vegetative growth phase. Those toxins do get absorbed, enter their hemolymph, get their body. How this MTX interacts with other pesticide, nobody has studied yet. So, so we went through BTI, spherix, spinosad, and the methylprednisolone, their mode of action, their resistance management, their current formulations, active ingredient, and residual activity and habitat. So give you over a picture of the materials that's available. And now, try to connect with the floodwater mosquitoes. Dr. Nobel give a very nice recap in California. You can apply more or less to other places. They're floodwater mosquito, more than we ever thought probably. In broad sense, Aedes aegypti, albopictus, we got here a lot, West Valley. They also floodwater mosquito, not breeding in the big flooding pan, in small habitat. One thing I want to highlight is that the Stegomyia species like Aedes aegypti and albopictus, they are not susceptible to Bacillus spherix. Well, you can kill them and use more. It's about 50 times if you run the bioassay. So, but nice thing about it is spherix still can kill other floodwater mosquitoes nicely. Larviciding, I would say for floodwater mosquito, mostly gonna be liquid and granular formulations. Even though I went through, the briquette and other residual 150, 180 days, I think in most habitat we're talking about liquid and granules. Resistance, like I said, resistance itself is really not a scary thing. The scary thing is you don't know what's going on there. You don't know you are doing the selection. And until you have a failure in operation, then you email or call me or somebody else, oh, can you take a look? And, that's kind of late. So the monitoring and rotational combination, and some of the products they already did it for the back-to-backs, they already put together, such a nice tool. And of course, 4-star. And of course, duplex, they have two unique mode of action built in, which can be a very powerful tool. So with that, I'm gonna conclude my talk here to entertain any questions our audience may have or panel may have. If you're not so sure, it's better being silent but still ask, I don't mind. So Caroline, I'm gonna